on Netflix right now, showing I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore. The movie opens with our female hero, or protagonist, if you will, Ruth, who is taking care of an elderly patient who is complaining about something she sees on TV. And she looks very old and in ill health. And she says something, some sort of curse or something inappropriate or vulgar, and passes away. It doesn't seem terribly shocking to her, but not a normal necessarily occurrence necessarily either. The family asks for her last words, and she says, kind of nods that there was nothing happening, which can be interpreted as, from the feeling that I got was that she felt socially awkward about the vulgarity, perhaps what she said, and mentioning that to the family as her last words. So she says nothing instead. And we see her going to a store to do some shopping. Someone knocks something off the shelf. She puts it back. There's people in line. People are just kind of rude in a small way overall. She's going to a bar. She's reading a book. Someone there at the bar spoils the book. What's going to happen next for her? And at first, you might feel like, I don't know if I want to watch this. I just don't want to watch some, person just getting upset over all these, which are inconveniences, but minor trivialities throughout life. She finds that there is dog feces in her yard, which she explicitly has a sign saying no dog feces. And it seems that this is a regular occurrence that's been occurring and that she can't get it to stop. She comes into her house and she's been robbed. She calls the police, but they, of course, aren't super helpful. I think a laptop, some silverware, and 2 of her medications were stolen, which is important, actually, as they're, I think, for anxiety and depression, those sorts of medications. She, again, in the morning, finds more dog feces in her yard. And while she's cleaning it up, she sees somebody walking down the street with her dog, being upset because of what she claims is the violation. Oh, and I forgot something. She actually did go talk to a girlfriend about the incident. She was actually reading a story to her friend's daughter, and her daughter got a little freaked out because she was having a hard time dealing with the robbery, and not just the physical things necessarily gone, but she said she felt violated, which is interesting because she doesn't look like she has much of a life. There seems to be no one else in her life. There doesn't seem to be doing very much. It seems a very placid, passive existence, yet she does feel something over this. And then the husband also was not happy that she was there, although it's not clear why, at that friend's house. So then we go back. She sees the person who she thinks is messing in her yard and goes after him. She throws the wrapped dog feces at the person but misses. They are wearing earphones, and they pull them out, and they have a brief interaction where he somewhat apologizes because he sometimes says he just doesn't seem to know what to do. He's a little awkward, and they leave. Then she goes door to door, asking her neighbors for help. She has odd neighbors. No one seems to be particularly helpful. They're all in their own lives for the most part. They all have their own things that they're doing, the things that they're into. They're almost all holding something. I think one's holding like a yogurt that you squeeze into your mouth. Another one has a child. They're all doing something. I think this can be interpreted as not only are they involved in their own lives, they have their own lives, but they're still interacting with her. One's a little creepy, wants her number. I don't think she gives it to him, if I remember right. She runs across the same guy. I believe his name is Tony. And at first she just wants to leave, doesn't want to interact with him, and questioning about if they saw anything about the robbery. But he does. He kind of wants to talk to her. I think this is the first hint that we get that he, he's dressed very slovenly, almost like a kid would be dressed, a kid that doesn't have parents, a kid that's directionless, and that's what we see a lot in him. He does agree to help her and in what they're doing if they can do something, but he doesn't have any information. She doesn't either. At some point, she does notice that there is a footprint in her backyard that does not belong to her, and she believes that it is the robbers, so she makes a plaster of Paris mold of that footprint. She finally gets a ding on her cell phone telling her where her laptop is located, that somebody has turned it on. At first, she calls her friend's husband, but he is busy, as we can see, with their child. Yet again, somebody who has a life, who is doing something, unlike her placid existence, which can be shown by the book that she's interested in, which everyone seems to be interested in reading around her to some degree. In various points of the movie, that comes up. But it's entirely like fictional, almost like a Stephen King. So it's a very pop, entertainment book to be reading, and kind of lulling her into her own world, into her own fiction that she's living, instead of having a meaningful existence. So then she ends up calling Tony and asking if he will go with her, and he's really eager to do this, which I think we could see this as kind of like the guy wanting to impress the girl, but he's not much of a guy. I mean, when she met him the second time at his house, he's lifting weights in the backyard, but there's no covering, so he's all awkward. He's living a bizarro life, so to speak, of not being a man, still acting like a child, but a child that's trying to act like a man, but has no direction, has no influence, just doesn't know what he's doing. And he's, he does appear to be older, like he's in his 30s, like she is, it appears, and that's pretty directionless at that point. So he goes with her, and they go up to the house, and there's a person, just a young man, standing out front, kind of just loafing, and he doesn't seem particularly helpful when she begins questioning him. So it looks like it's going to get physical. And if I remember correctly, Tony has brought a morning star with him, and he holds like in a combat position, but he doesn't move to strike, and the other person moves to grab the morning star. And however they moved it, which I thought it was filmed pretty well, because you couldn't exactly see what had happened, but that person ends up hitting themselves with it, because of course it's attached to a chain. So when they push and they pull it and trying to pull it away from the person, it comes and swings and hits their own face, and it knocks them down. And they're both a little shocked, but she's mad as well. So they go into the house. There's 3 other people in the house, and they have her laptop. And there's an awkward exchange there, but it turns out that they purchased the laptop, what they thought, I guess, was legitimately. And these are not the robbers. These are not the thieves. But they do give her the location of where they purchased it from, which is kind of like a junk shop, as we'll meet later. And so they leave, and they're both really excited. It's really cool. She got her laptop back, so they're very excited. They kind of party a little bit. They drink, but they don't sleep together, which is interesting, because I think this is, in some ways, it's very telling that they're still a bit in this fiction. Like, she appears to have her own life that she is satisfied with, but it's not a real life. It's not a meaningful life. And conversely, you can kind of see that in his life, especially as we go on and we learn little bits of it here and there. Because he doesn't appear very physically adept, but he wants to be. So that's that striving for wanting to be a man, but not knowing how to go about it. For example, he carries like ninja stars around, and he throws them at that house that they go into to recover the laptop, and it sticks in the wall. And it's funny, because a lot of the action scenes can be laughed at, but I don't actually think you're supposed to really laugh at them, especially as the movie gets more serious as it moves along, because they do appear to, it's like it's sad. You're watching a person attempt to be a man without ever knowing how to, though. Like, they've never actually seen a man in real life. Oh, and before that, I think as they were going to that, Tony pulls out a cross and says a prayer. So we're not sure exactly how devout of a Christian he is, but that does come up later in the movie as well, and I want to mention that. It's kind of interesting, because that harkens back to, he's the one that seemed to be more striving. She's more reactive, right? He's a little more proactive. He's a little more active, and he actually does attend a church, which he doesn't, like I said, appear to be like a super Christian. I don't know what to call it, but someone who's always proselytizing or talking about it, but he does. It's like harkening back to the knowledge. Like, he wants meaning in his life. He wants his life to mean something. So he does go to church, even though he may not be the most devout Christian. He does see something there, something greater than himself, some more meaning outside of his existence, out of just the lusts and desires and the base carnal nature of our desires. So they wake up in the morning. It's a little awkward, even though they didn't have sex. And they're eating, and they question, do we want to go to this place? Well, of course, because she lost something that was more valuable, really, than just the medications in her laptop, but a silver set, a set of silver from her grandmother, who, even though we don't see much about that, apparently that means something to her, which again is interesting, because you see this hearkening back to the past, but in Tony's situation, it's more past looking for the meaning, such as going to church, a very, I guess, old-fashioned thing nowadays to do. And in her case, it's the actual physical silverware that, even though she has no children, She has no one really in her life. Like, what is that silverware going to do? It's meaningless without some greater context to it. But to her, it does still mean something, some connection to the past, maybe to a better time. Maybe that's part of her striving for that meaning, that part that she doesn't really realize yet. So they go to the junk shop. It's a very ramshackle place, very sketchy looking. And although interestingly enough, there was a sign that I didn't have time to read because they just barely show it, but it has the hours of the store. And it's a very detailed explanation of we're usually open between 9 and 10, but sometimes we're open as early as 7 and sometimes as late as, and it just kept going on. It was a whole billboard thing, which I found very interesting for such a ramshackle place, that there was that level of precision in their hours. Or imprecision, as it might be actually, because it's kind of like, well, you could be open anytime with that sort of an explanation. They meet the proprietor, who is another odd person, kind of seems lost in their own world. He's trying to sell them a keyboard of sorts. They don't really go for that. They're trying to explain they want some silver, and he wanders off to go help another customer while they're kind of looking in what looks like a kitchen area of sorts, where there's kitchen different things, and she finds it. So she gives him the car keys and to go start the car. And she's going to run off with the stuff, which she does. The older man, the proprietor of the junk shop, pursues her. At this point, I think they cross paths with the actual thieves, although my mind's a little vague on that point. And and at some point they get an idea of, like, those were the real thieves that did it. But I don't remember how that occurred. But as she's leaving the store, going to the car, the older man pursues her, the proprietor, and he grabs her, and she turns around kind of quickly, and I guess somewhat on accident hits him with it, and he complains about that. He's mad about it. He gets up and he breaks one of her fingers. It's actually bent crooked, and that's when Tony leaps into the rescue and knocks him down, the old man, and they grab the silverware, get in the car, and take off. So they are, very excited about having gotten that silverware. At one point earlier in the movie, I believe that she does go back to the police officer, who is not very helpful, and he appears to be going through his own crises. He's going through a divorce apparently right now, and it goes to this theme again of the movie of her going. I guess she's doing the nice thing, the correct thing, and she's not getting anywhere with that. So only when because one of her complaints throughout the movie is the world's full of assholes. But it's funny, she only gets things done in the world when she becomes a bit of an asshole herself. And I think that's an interesting thing, that the very thing she's complaining about is apparently also what makes the world work to a degree. It's kind of like you can't live life without getting your hands dirty to a degree. Or at least you can't live a meaningful life if you never get your hands dirty, because it's going to happen whether you like it or not to some degree. So she's obtained the most important items to her. Her medication, it doesn't really seem to ever be important to replace, although they do bring it up that she might want to take her medication back. So the problems that she's having now might be in part due to not having her medication, which is interesting, because if she's taking the medication, then she would live this placid, bland, meaningless existence. But she's somewhat safe, I suppose, in a way, or at least her feelings are safe, because she doesn't really have very strong feelings. Like, even when the person spoils the book for her, she doesn't really react very much to that. Not like, thanks, asshole, or you really shouldn't have said that, or anything like that. She just kind of just placid about it. And then, so off the medication, though, when she's doing what she's not supposed to be doing, when she's kind of not following the plan that has been there for her, not only does she start to become an asshole, but she starts to become more of a person. Like, maybe the only reason that she wasn't an asshole earlier was because she was drugging herself, basically, and losing herself in her own fiction, like her books, which she's really into. So it's not that she wasn't an asshole, it's that she wasn't living a real life. She was kind of this shell of a person living this fictionalized existence, a meaningless existence that had no point. I mean, it was kind of depressing watching the first 5 or 10 minutes, because I was like, oh my God, this can't be the movie. I can't watch this lady going about this stuff like this. But it quickly is more than that. It's just getting you the starting point that she's at, which is kind of a really low starting point, even though there's nothing explicitly bad except for the burglary. So she has the actual items that mean something to her laptop and her silverware. The medication I'm sure it could be easily replaced. So, but she still wants satisfaction. And this is also confusing because she says a violation of her home, but it's almost like it's a violation of her zombified existence. It's almost what she's reacting to. We see a little bit more of the person that did the burglary, a young man with blonde hair. Interestingly enough, his name is Christian. And he's defecating in the top part of someone's toilet, running, just kind of walking idly through their house, stealing some jewelry. One of the homeowner pursues him and questions him because it's a big party, so the guy's not too sure like if he's supposed to be there or not, but then he kind of gets the idea he's out of place. He questions him outside, and Chris tricks him into looking behind him by just saying something like, oh, who's that? And the guy turns around and he sucker punches him and beats him up pretty good and leaves. Well, and then we meet the other two part of that crew. There's actually 3 people in total. So we have Chris, we have the older man, which appears to be the leader kind of the group, and a girl. And they're obviously planning something. They're obviously a crew that's up to no good, but we don't know exactly what. So they get back to the house. They're a little... Ruth is a bit upset because she didn't get the plate of that van, which is the people now that they know that stole the items from her. But Tony did. So they look it up, and he uses this chance to attempt to impress her with his internet sleuthing skills. And while doing it, interestingly enough, his computer pops up with, pop-up porn stuff. And they're both a little embarrassed about that and everything. But I think it goes to show his also, because this is where they find out that Tony is also reading the book that she is reading. And he tells her, oh, don't tell me, though, anything about it. I hate it when people spoil it for me. So they were both living this, in their own ways, this zombified life. Like, she's on medication. He's using porn. They're both reading these fictional books, kind of losing themselves in their life. He's working out in the backyard, right? And also, when they first met, or the second time they met, he explains that part of the reason he acted weird and that he may not have noticed his dog pooping in her yard because he was listening to headphones and he gets lost in his own thoughts a whole lot. Again, a zombified existence going through both of them. And his apparent interest in her, and then her in home life being invaded and being shook up, her zombified fictional life being disturbed, is what's upsetting her. And his pursuit, kind of, because he does kind of seem to want to impress her, but he's not like being a jerk about it or something like, or overstating it really, just a little bit. But they do find out who the van belongs to, and they go to the house, and it's a really nice house. Like, this house probably costs, $5-10 million at least. So they're really stunned because there's a nice car out front, and they're really stunned. It's a very ordered house, lawn manicured, everything's taken care of. They knock on the door, and she got a kind of a fake police badge of sorts that they're using. They go in, they ring the door, a lady comes to the house. She appears to be a little off, almost like she's high, drunk, just not entirely there. And they go into the house, they're having a nice conversation with her, they're asking her about the stuff, the van, the car, and they eventually find out through the conversation that it's Christian is her son, her stepson rather, and the dad is apparently never around. Her and Christian never got along, and he's kind of just a loser from what they hear. She makes them some coffee, and we find out about Tony, that he used to work as a barista, I believe, a coffee person, and he got quite good making little faces and stuff with the foam in people's coffee, which is kind of an interesting detail, that he is yet again trying to impress someone with what meager skills he has, which isn't much. He doesn't have much. He doesn't really appear to be, he wants to be a fighter. He's not really, he wants to be effective and useful. And he, even when he's looking up the license plate, it's not like he can actually look it up. He goes to a website that you pay, which I'm sure we've all seen that, where you pay money and they just tell you what the license plate of the person is. And during the course of their conversation, the father comes home, and they're a little scared at first because he has a security guard with him and pulls the gun on him, but they're talking, and he is apparently also just a jerk. Like, he's like, people are always lying, the world is deceitful, you gotta do what you can to get ahead. Very cynical person. and kind of makes fun of Ruth's, like, I just don't want people to be assholes line, which should be actually laughed at in one respect, but also is very apparent as well. Like, it's kind of a truth of the world, you know. It's like, the sun rose today. Well, yes, that's true, but you don't need to necessarily say that every single day. It's like almost like a push that she needs to get beyond that. So they leave, and it is indeed, you know, they know now who has robbed her. They don't know where their son is at, which is funny, you know, wayward son type thing. You know, Christian does appear to be very lost, very meaningless, just terrible existence of a life. She damages a couple of the lawn ornaments and takes a tiger back with her. It's a wired, like, tiger outside decoration. Tony is very disturbed by this, and I think it's, you know, due to what we've seen of him attempting to be a man. Like, he says, if I'd known this was what's going to happen, I wouldn't have come. If I'd known this was going to happen, I wouldn't have been a part of this. Because now she's really is kind of becoming an asshole. Because the father even offers to pay her off. And she's like, I don't want your money. I just want people not to be assholes. And that's when he kind of makes fun of her. And so, you know, I had to say that's pretty funny. But now she's gone too far, and she is becoming, you know, really just an asshole. There was really no need for that. No good can come of that. So Tony leaves. She goes back home. And something very important to remember is that the first robbery, even though it's not made explicitly clear, it doesn't look like the door was forced to come in. So she left the door unlocked in her placid existence and allowed someone to come in. Now, of course, we don't know. Christian may have tried the lock and just moved on if it was locked. That's what a lot of times what people do, you know, when they're stealing. They will go through a whole big car lot and just check each car, and if somebody left the car unlocked, they'll just walk in. Also, again, he might have just tried to break it as well. So we don't really know whether her action would have prevented this or not. But given that, and he probably was trying everybody's house to a degree, because it's not like he targeted her house, really. It doesn't appear there was anything like that. It was entirely random. So he was probably just trying houses to see if somebody left their house unlocked. She has left her house unlocked again, and Christian has come back. They want to know what she knows because they are up to something. They have purchased some guns, which are very sketchy, terrible looking guns, honestly, earlier. And so we know that something on their end, they're planning some big thing. They don't want Ruth to ruin it, whatever it is. So Christian begins to ask her his, line of inquiry, but she just responds instantly and whacks him in the throat with something kind of hard and heavy. Almost looks like frozen meat of a sort. And I don't know if you've ever been hit near your windpipe. Of course, that can actually kill you if it crushes your Adam's apple, but even just a good strong whack there can really be disorienting, especially if you've never had it happen before, because you don't breathe properly. And when most people are used to breathing regularly, and when that gets interrupted either by getting your solar plexus hit or the throat like that, you're very like, you just kind of gagging the whole time. You don't know what's going on. And like I said, people are not used to that sensation at all. So he just kind of wanders out in the street, kind of choking a little bit. And he's just stumbling around, and he gets hit by a bus. Well, the other two come up, knock Ruth out, take her away. So here we find out they're wanting Ruth to participate in some sort of heist they're planning. And the reason they need Ruth is because their third person, which obviously they don't give a crap about him, Christian, they need a third person for this. So Ruth does go along. They give her an empty, no bullets in it gun, and they go back to Christian's parents' house. She knocks on the door. The security guy comes. They hustle the security guard and the wife into the main living room. They're sitting down. They want to call for the husband because apparently there is a safe in the house that they believe has money. And they keep being told repeatedly that it's too late. The money's been moved. It's not there. Well, the dad, Christian's father, which is also, his name is Chris, if I remember correctly, comes down, but he's suspicious. And he grabs a small pistol, and he's coming back down. And as soon as he rounds a corner, the girl shoots him she has like a double-barreled shotgun, shoots him and kind of like blows his actual hand off with the firearm. So during this, event, Ruth is so scared that she drops the gun. The security guard goes to grab her gun, picks it up, tries to shoot somebody. It is, of course, empty. The security guy gets shot. He actually, though, rallies back and attempts to attack the person, the older man of the crew, the criminal crew. And but he does end up dying, the security guard. So, and it appears that the older man that's in charge of the crew, he's getting off on this chaos and this excitement, this blood, like he starts off kind of cowardly at the beginning of the encounter, very afraid and timid, but as the violence continues to escalate, he continues to be getting into it more and more and more. So the father, who is now missing a hand, goes over and punches in the code to unlock his safe, which is a very simple combination, if I remember correctly, at 4321. And there's really nothing in there. There's no money. There's some papers and other things like that, but nothing that they were wanting. So now they're really getting a little wigged out by all this because they're not getting what they wanted, the criminals. Ruth has attempted to tell the wife that is now there that she didn't actually have any part in this. She didn't want to do this. She was coerced into it. Although coincidentally enough, the security guard does pull off the older man's face mask, which is kind of important. And because the father does recognize him and knows that he's one of Marshall's bad friends after Marshall went to jail, started hanging around with. Or not Marshall, I think that's the guy's name is Marshall, but Christian, his son. So it looks like it's pretty bad, and they're getting ready to kill the two witnesses now. Ruth does, though, step in front of the lady with the shotgun and tells her that she's not going to let her kill anyone else, which is kind of interesting because here Ruth is for once taking an active choice by herself, and she's not attacking the person, but she is saying she'd have to kill her first, which of course the girl with the shotgun, she is shown no shy of violence at all. So she goes to shoot her, and now I don't remember the exact sequence of this event, so you'll have to excuse me if I've made a mistake here, but at some point she does pull the shotgun for another round of fire, and where we've seen that it's very sketch and kind of welded together, it looks like almost by accident of some degree, it does explode, and she is injured, the criminal lady with the shotgun. And Tony does appear at some point here, but we saw him earlier. I think he was looking around for her at her house and other places trying to figure out what was going on. And he throws a star and hits that lady in the cheek with it, one of his ninja stars, which obviously does not incapacitate her, but it does kind of ruin that. Ruth and the older criminal man are tussling a little bit. And what's funny is he does appear very unhealthy, very unfit, very unathletic. So I think it's very realistic that she... And I'm glad the movie didn't do this, but it's not like they presented it to where she easily overcame him or anything. But she does kind of whack him with the pistol, hurt his knee, and beat him up a little bit. Very realistic, though, in that sense. And however, the younger criminal lady pulls out a switchblade and sticks Tony probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 times in the abdomen. So that's getting pretty serious because he's bleeding. It's not a real long knife, but still... Obviously, that much blood, you could die just from simple blood loss, not necessarily that an organ was damaged enough to kill you. So, Ruth gets Tony out of there. Oh, yeah. While they're tussling, Ruth and the older man, the gun goes off, and it pings off of some of the stonework in the house and actually hits the younger girl thief and kills her. That's actually what ends up killing her. So, Ruth grabs Tony, and they're kind of... She's trying to help him, get out of the house and get away. And the older criminal man appears to be somewhat sad that the younger lady has now died. Although I guess sad isn't really the right word. I guess he's more angry and vengeful about it. So he is pursuing Ruth and Tony to extract his vengeance on them. They reach a body of water, and Ruth attempts to start a motor on one of the boats, but she can't. So she just takes the paddle boat out, one with oars, and oars across. Well, of course, the other guy then comes eventually down to the lake, sees them, and gets in, and he is able to start the boat, the motor, and comes across. She hides Tony, and leaves, having him, the criminal, chase her. She goes through a swamp bit of water. There's a snake in the water, a rather large snake. She's very cautious. She doesn't move. Lets the snake go by. She wanders on up. She grabs some rocks. She's taunting the criminal who's pursuing her, now obviously just in mind to kill her. And he's also, throwing things out at her. He comes up to get her. His pistol's out by now, but he does have a knife out of ammo. And he goes up. He sees where she's at. He runs, attempts to run up there again. He's a very unfit, very unathletic person. She throws her rocks, hits him once, hits him twice, knocks him down into the water where the snake was. We hear him screaming. She runs off. It's apparent, they show us later, that the snake has actually bitten him in the face. And he's apparently undergoing an excruciating death. He's trying to get away, but he's kind of collapsed in the forest. Well, while in the forest, because she ran, she is lost. She doesn't know where Tony is. She doesn't know where she's going. She sees her grandmother, who we saw in one brief scene, a flashback earlier in the movie. And her grandmother points. Again, this is the past, the wisdom of the past, pointing us in the right direction, pointing us to what is actually meaningful. So she finds Tony. We're not sure if Tony's alive or dead. He's not moving. He's not responsive now. And this time she's using the motorboat, which she was previously unable to start. But she's using that now to come back. In a way showing her mastery of a degree, perhaps. So the next part of the movie, again, I don't remember exactly which happened in which sequence, but she's kind of, we see she's back. She's talking to the police officer. The police officer now, him and his wife are going to make a go of it again. She appears to be a bit stunned, through all the ordeal that she has suffered here or been through. And we see her go to church, which she did go to a church service with Tony. And at one point during the church service, you could see that Tony, in the first one, Tony wanted to hold her hand, but kind of didn't. Again, showing their fictional, their zombified state, that they're in their own lives. And like, he likes her, but, he's also in his own state, just like she was, not wanting to break out of it. But she goes to the church. Tony's nowhere to be found, and we don't see Tony. So you may be thinking at this point Tony perhaps has died, because she does appear somewhat lost and saddened. And then we see that she is in her backyard, and we see the little girl that belonged to her friend playing with the lights. And her friend and her, Ruth and her friend, are watching the girl play and kind of talking. And her friend throws out a cliched line of, well, you have the rest of your life to some degree, something like that. And she looks at her and she goes, I don't know what that means. Which I think is really important in a way, because she starts off apparently satisfied with her life. This placid thing that has no meaning, that's not going anywhere, that just exists, but there's no point to it. And she's finally able to admit that she doesn't know what something means. That she doesn't know, to admit her own ignorance in the world of meaning, so that perhaps now she can find a way through for that meaning. And as the camera pans back, we see Tony in the sunlight. He looks like almost like an angel, smiling at her. And you're not sure at first, wait, is this a vision? Is she seeing things like she did with her grandmother? Or is... But as it shows, no, he's really there. Him, Tony, and the other husband are making burgers, and they're arguing over how to make the burgers, which coincidentally enough is to squeeze the juice out or not squeeze the juice out. By the way, you shouldn't squeeze the juice out of your burgers. That's what keeps it moist. Don't smash them down. And Tony wants to, if I remember correctly, he's wanting to squeeze the juice out. Which, funny enough, we also see that he's changed his clothes entirely. He's dressed more like a proper person. It's like light blue pastels, if I remember correctly. It's a very short scene that you see him in that. But he's also using crutches. And somewhere around there is where the movie ends. And I found that very interesting because it's kind of like he was an angel in her life, to where she had no point, no meaning. And here he is, not only helping her along her path, and in some ways being her conscience. But the only way that he can be her conscience is because he still has a tie to the past knowledge, such as going to church, saying his prayer before they undertook their first adventure to retrieve the laptop. And she is now open to a new existence. Like, I think having the shot there with the child, showing that, you know, maybe they will have a child. Maybe she'll have a family. She'll have a point. She'll have someone that she can give that silverware to that meant so much. It's not the silverware, it's the meaning behind it. And if there's no one else there to carry on that meaning, then it truly doesn't mean nothing. That silverware is just atoms. It's just another set of atoms in this whole universe that has no purpose, no meaning, and it's no different than the rock, the dirt, the air, or the silverware. And I did like this because in some ways they have you have two character arcs of Tony and Ruth, although the movie is centered on Ruth, and they're pulling as they're in their own shell, their own fantasy. And as she's finally acted to move, she gets off her medication. She's attempting to do something, even with help in her life. And at first it's badly, like she wants her stuff back. Well, that seems okay. But then she just wants to confront this person that went into her house. Well, what are you going to gain from that? Well, not exactly what she thought, but she did gain meaning. It's on Netflix if you'd like to see it. Bye.